What is the creepiest, most disturbing internet rabbit hole you've gone down, and why? Blogs by people who are obsessed with losing limbs or having them replaced with hooks, etc. Some went through with accidents where they mashed their hands beyond repair in order to achieve their goal. Reminds of that guy from South Africa who had a blog I came across a few years ago. His thing was amputations, and he badly wanted to get his perfectly healthy foot amputated for whatever reason. He felt like it didn't belong to his own body. He would inflict injuries to his foot by cutting it with a knife, then put it in a bucket full of his own poop to cause infection. It was all documented, with daily pictures. You could literally see the daily progression of his foot rotting and becoming black, until one day he stopped posting. He came back a few weeks later and wrote he almost died. He had passed out because of a bad case of sepsis, blood infection, and his landlord found him in the bathroom. Crazy stuff. And yes, he came back from hospital with his foot amputated. Success. The emotional whiplash made me laugh way harder at this than I should have. There was one doing the rounds recently on here with a guy that gave his own hands frostbite by keeping them in dry ice so they had to be amputated. That one kept popping up on the various outrage subs for a few weeks. How does that sort of thinking even start, I wonder? Looking up pictures of people who hit the ground after falling from great heights. I looked it up mostly out of morbid curiosity. Definitely would not recommend for anyone with a weak stomach. One of the worst things I've seen is a video of a guy trying to commit suicide by jumping off a building, but he lands on one of those big concrete bollards and it literally goes inside him. There was even a close-up in the video of him still alive with this huge lump in his shoulder from the top of the bollard. Oh shoot, I remember that one. It went through his entire body and it shook me when he remained alive. Those couple of minutes must have been horrific. Unit 731. What they did is really fricked up. In other tests, subjects were deprived of food and water to determine the length of time until death, placed into low pressure chambers until their eyes popped from the sockets, experimented upon to determine the relationship between temperature, burns, and human survival, electrocuted, placed into centrifuges and spun until death, injected with animal blood, exposed to lethal doses of X-rays, subjected to various chemical weapons inside gas chambers, injected with seawater, and burned or read alive. Getting placed into a centrifuge and spun until death sounds horrendous. That story and the story of the dude who ultimately died when he ended up stuck with his head down in a deep awkward cave makes me feel intensely claustrophobic. I would want an instant death switch I could hit rather than suffering like that. The Nutty Putty Cave? Reading that still haunts me. Cave diving accidents. They're always tragic and sad and insanely common in the community due to the dangers of cave diving. But they have been to some of the most untouched areas of Earth and I kind of get the need to keep exploring even if it's dangerous. I read about a pair of blokes who realized their line had snapped and they were trapped in an air pocket with only enough oxygen for one of them to try and escape for help. Dude had to wait in the pitch black for hours not knowing if his friend had reached help or died along the way. Scares the crap out of me. I can barely bring myself to swim under small stuff in safe swimming pools. I've never tried diving and I really don't think I could conquer that fear. What was the result? I can't go without answers. They both survived. The friend made it out and a search crew went in for the second. There are some, not too graphic videos on YouTube of recovered footage from divers that recorded their last dive. An especially heartbreaking one was a dude who dived to recover the body of a friend who died in a cave, and ended up dying there too. You can see him slipping on the floor, fumbling a knife while trying to cut some kind of rope, the panic setting in. Just terribly sad. I have fallen down too. Both lasted about a week. First was Jane Does who have never been claimed or identified. Second was people who have disappeared without a trace. I feel this one tugged more on my emotional strings, especially stories involving kids. One that has stuck with me is a little boy who disappeared on a scout hike. Jared Negrete. That is one of my greatest fears when I take kids hiking. It was that kid's first time sleeping away like that. Heartbreaking. A sci-fi timeline PDF I found a while back. I think it was on the world building sub. It was a timeline of humanity that started it off relatively normal, detailing human evolution as they colonized Mars and the stars beyond. It descended into body horror when they came into contact with an advanced race that for some reason I forget gene modded the majority of humans into non-sentient species and seeded them across the galaxy. It then went into great detail with each of these species separately in their climb back to sentience. It ended with one of the new humans that evolved back to sentience standing beside her original human skull. I haven't been able to find it since, but shoot got dark. Deaths on Mountain Everest and how a lot of the bodies are still up there. This was a wiki rabbit hole I fell into after listening to the Cassophile episode on David Sharp. Read not only about him, but also Green Boots, this couple that got separated, etc. Due to the extremely cold temperatures, the bodies aren't that decomposed, so they still look recent even though it's been years or decades. It's creepy and sad. Some bodies have been there so long they are used as markers for climbers. What is also sad is that there have been efforts to remove them, but doing so is extremely dangerous because of the altitude, temperatures, and uneven ground. People have died attempting it in the past. Not sure if they've managed to succeed since I last read about it in 2018. It's absolutely fascinating and disturbing to read as a mountaineer. In 2010, I was just above Camp 3 on Aconcagua, tallest mountain in the Americas, when I got lost in a blizzard. I had altitude sickness. I was so weak, exhausted and now lost, that I got stuck in a big snowdrift and just sat down. I closed my eyes and one of my last thoughts was how peaceful everything was. It's scary how close I came to being a frozen corpse on a big mountain. I'm so lucky that the guide I was with managed to find my tracks before they got filled in. Made it down alive. The murder of Jungko Furuta. Just read it. Those kids are literal freaking demons. Even most cartel tortures don't last that long. Poor girl. Literally suffered for absolutely nothing. And to think that the kids that did it are still out today. That's the one that fricked me up the last time I followed this sort of AskReddit. That one was rough. Every time this gets mentioned I reread the accounts, thinking I'm going to find that one thing I never noticed before that sheds light on how it was possible for this to happen, with so many participants, so many complicit people and essentially no consequences. Of course, I never find it. I read about the Japanese concentration camps being especially horrible on Reddit, and that was extremely depressing and fricked up, but I couldn't bring myself to stop reading. Yeah, I fell down the Unit 731 rabbit hole for a while back in 2018. I think I felt weird for a full week afterwards. One thing that stuck with me was reading an interview with a surviving scientist who, when asked if he felt guilty, he responded, "No, we did nothing wrong. This was war, and in war, you have to win." A relative of mine is a social worker who deals with older people. She helped arranging care for a man with Alzheimer's a few years ago. Unfortunately, a lot of people with this disease regress into very old memories. This man had been a prisoner of war of the Japanese, been subject to torture and all sorts. He was in a constant state of terror, because his memory had regressed to the point where he thought he was back there and there was nothing anyone could do about it for him. Absolutely awful. On the flip side, my sister has a lot of Alzheimer's patients that think they are back overseas in the military and frequently comment that this is the best brothel, meaning the hospital, they have ever been to. Japan deserved a Nuremberg trial of their own for their conduct in World War II. I understand why it didn't happen that way. Western men, especially with USA's history with Japan, holding mass trials against Japan wouldn't either worked. It is still fricked that numerous war criminals survived the surrender and reconstruction with no penalties. Jonestown Massacre. A cult-led town that all were coerced into suicide. There's an audio recording on YouTube of the whole town committing mass suicide. Albert Fish, a cannibal serial killer that wrote a letter to the parents of one of the little girls he ate. The group stalking sites and subreddit. Just to be clear, I don't think it's real, but holy shit. It's just so crazy thinking about how all these people are dead ass convinced that there are massive conspiracies against them. I didn't leave the link on purpose, because after spending any significant amount of time on there, you sort of start to think it could be real. Holy shoot, and I thought I was crazy. One of the weirdest for me was reading about the violence in Yugoslavia during World War II, especially about the Croatian Ustaše and the Jasenovac concentration camp. The entire area was beset by civil war, with shocking violence originating from multiple parties, but the anecdotes about the Ustaše stand out. A high-ranking member of the Nazi party visited Croatia, where the Nazis had helped establish a puppet state. Witnessing the extent of the violence himself, he was quoted as saying, "This is enough to make a man vomit. Jasenovac is something no mortal man could bear to witness." Frick dude. I wish I didn't read it, but glad I did at the same time. I didn't know anything about it. Auschwitz is commonly talked about in any World War II history stuff. This was way worse. I can't believe gassing people sounds better than what happened there. Hitler's camps were only the starting point. Frick. I can't believe I'm saying this, but Hitler's camps were mostly about numbers. There was some weird and horrible shoot on the side, but it was incidental to the relatively efficient death machine. A lot of other concentration camps since then have been set up with much darker goals in mind than simple extermination. I feel dirty.